following meetings that we had earlier in the year in Europe, where some of our various NSB colleagues told us about the impact of the incredible changes that have happened this year had on their organizations and how they responded, we thought it would be a useful and interesting brief session to just recap those and try and summarize what those impacts were. And we've kind of broadly summarized that into sort of three or four different areas. So people responded with standards themselves. So some incredible work went on in the world of standards making. And that was in terms of content, but also in terms of the way we work. There were big changes in terms of training, and Kim from IEEE is going to talk a little bit about that. And also there is some serendipity around work that's going on at ISO in terms of digital tools and the way that we're going to make standards in the future. So Victoria and Patrice are going to help us through that later in the session. But first off, I'm going to talk about fast track standards and virtual standards creation. So next slide, please. So these are the topics that I was just talking about. So if we can skip through now to slide 4. So this is fine. So can you go back one, please, Ahing? So yeah, just in our sessions earlier in the year, we had some great conversations between NEN, DIN, AFNOR, ANOR, BSI, and lots of other organizations who talked to us about their rapid response to the pandemic. And it was very interesting to see the commonality of some of the challenges and also a lot of the benefits that came through this. So I'm going to very briefly try to summarize. This isn't an exhaustive list of activity, but it's just some illustrations of what some of our colleagues and BSI worked on earlier in this year. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with briefly, if you've not heard about this, these events, then this is a very impressive one. AFNOR moved very, very quickly and in the early weeks of the pandemic created documents to support the general public and manufacturers around masks for COVID-19. And you can see here the details of what those documents covered, requirements for manufacturer, testing, materials, dimensions, etc. And also templates and patterns for people to use to create their own masks. Now, if you'd like to build the slide, the incredible thing is that this pace at which these were created, and then the volume of downloads that were and pattern downloads that were created. So we can only imagine now, 6 to 9 months on, the number of lives potentially that could have been saved by people using this information from AFNOR. So this was very impressive, and these documents continue to be downloaded. They were supported also by the idea of a broker platform to connect PPE manufacturers, suppliers and users as well. So it was a fully sort of integrated approach and just done at incredible speed. So if we look at the next example, we talked to NEN as well, and they were in a situation, and we'll talk about BSI as well in a moment, but they had been talking about a process called NEN Spec, which was a way of rapidly creating standards. And again, they sprung into action and created a set of documents in a maximum of 3 weeks. And those documents were made available for free via their website. There's some key things around these documents. You know, they have attributes which are different to our traditional view of standards. They can contradict standards and they don't have to be aligned, but they're less a standard, more a solution that fits the identified customer need that's needed at pace. But they did go through some level of formal approval. So there's one more build there, which just, you know, the objective is really that these things fit the purpose that they're needed there and then, and that they're delivered in the time window that they're needed. They may well then move on to be something else, but they're delivered at the time that they're required. And as you can see, many downloads of these as well in their specific subject areas as required. So you'll see, if we move on to the next slide, a very similar story unfolding in the UK. We focused on a very specific area around safe working, and again the team used an approach that was already in pilot. So we were working on a new iterative fast track approach at BSI, which has now been sort of formally launched, called BSI Flex. And that enables us to do rapid iterative development and rapid consultation on documents that respond very much to situations like this or other fast moving areas. The document focused on areas, as you can see, on home working, managing cases around inclusivity and accessibility in the workplace, and health and well-being also. And we've done 3 versions of that standard, the most recent coming through in August, and those are being downloaded in each iteration as the document gets refreshed. So they've been a great success, and we've learned a lot about how to support these kinds of processes going forward. I should mention that you know, this was all happening alongside the massive effort to put out a selection of free standards that up until June we'd had around 80,000 downloads of free standards, as many other of the NSBs also made available. We're now up to, I think, around 120,000 as of October. So the market has really responded and appreciated the work that ISO, IEC, the different NSBs has done to make this essential information available. So next slide, please. Okay, we've got some numbers there. So we were also speaking to our friends at ANOR, and they were working in some very specific areas. They had a standard around, again, masks, facilities around funerals and restaurants. I'm sorry, my bar here on Teams is obscuring some of the writings on my slides. Let me just click through here. Yeah, so yeah, a lot around masks and general measures, but again, the pattern is the same. We've got response through the national authorities to the urgency of the situation, and documents being delivered in just a matter of weeks, where obviously we all know normally these things take a long time. What I will note is that within what I've done specifically on these slides, because our colleagues provided us with a huge wealth of information about these processes and these documents, I've built them all into the notes of the slides. So when these are circulated, you can learn a lot more about the detail. So if we go on to the next one. And finally, DIN were also kind enough to provide us with some information where they're working on using their DIN spec process, which is the sort of faster version of standard making, but these standards are still being worked upon in some very sensitive areas where around trade fairs, hotels and restaurants, to really deliver further guidance that can support their economies through the pandemic. So I'm just going to move on to one final slide here, if we move on, just to talk about how the conversation went when we compared our work in these areas. So what it showed was that the necessity is what forced us to suddenly accelerate. We'd been talking about at BSI, for example, progressing a capability like this for a long time, and then all of a sudden we were in the middle of the pandemic and we were doing it. And I think that was kind of an incredible thing to be a part of. What we did learn is that it wasn't really sustainable for us, and I'm sure there was challenges across all of the organizations. So we need to look at ways in terms of using digital tools and refining our processes and our connectivity to enable us to do this on an ongoing basis. But it really proved to be a massive accelerator for the work that we were doing. And incredibly, I mean, it's acted as a really useful sort of incubator for the tools and processes that we've been using. So that's the fast track standards. I'm now going to move on. I think if you can move our slides on a little bit here, onto virtual standards making. So I got a little bit of feedback from my colleagues at BSI who'd been plunged into the world of actually making standards across all of our committees in a virtual world. And so they gave me some interesting feedback, and we also gathered some from some of our colleagues in other countries. So next slide, please. You're all aware we were all pushed into the same situation. You know, standards making and committee management all moved online in one very, very brief period of time. And from our point of view, it's proved to be largely successful, in fact, incredibly successful, and has brought significant benefits. And we've continued to cycle through and improve that process as we've gone through 2020. I've just included it here from a particular Teams meeting here, a few examples of comments that we've had from our conversations and feedback from participants in standards making in recent weeks and months. Next slide, please. So if we look at the first column here, which is a building, so obviously there's a lot of things that work really well about working digitally, as we're doing now. If you're running committee meetings, you've got up to 20 people, it can be very coherent. You improve the diversity of attendees because it's a lot easier for people to attend. It's easier to invite and spread the range of people you're bringing in. And it works well because of time zones and things for your national meetings. So that's been a real positive learning curve. In terms of challenges, what becomes tricky is when meetings get larger, you're dealing with things where there are sensitivities, technicalities, and complexities. Things become more difficult, where you might need to be sort of taking people aside, having discrete conversations and bringing information back into the room to move decisions forward. There's been a lot of feedback that obviously the technology is challenged at the outset to enable those things, although we are aware that there's developments there and things we can take advantage of. Language is obviously a problem, and time zones as things move internationally, not through necessarily because of directly the language, but also but because of quality of audio, video, and how people use other senses to follow what's going on in a face-to-face physical meeting. So if we go to the third bar, so we see a lot of opportunities of tools and software and approaches that we can use to really accelerate this and make it even better in 21. Certainly from BSI's perspective, and I'm sure from all of you, we're not seeing a scenario where things revert to where we were in 2019. This has bolted us forward at a crazy rate, and now we have to take the best of this and build it into our future standards making world. So next slide is just a few just an identity really of where our future standards making might well end up in future times. You know, these capabilities are all things that have existed for some time, but now this situation has pushed us into a situation where we're bringing these things together, and certainly within BSI, and I'm sure across your organizations, you're now developing strategies to optimize these things to really get the most out of standards making. Right, so that's my brief session on that work that we collected there. I'm now going to hand over to Kim from IEEE, who's going to talk about how this whole situation has affected their sort of training and development activity and the work that they've got going on in that area. Kim.
Great. Thank you, Simon. So, you know, Simon, you used really great language, which I hadn't heard before, which is called virtual standards making. So, the virtual meetings that Simon discussed is a part of it, but what I'm going to discuss is an element of that, which is training of working groups. Next slide, please. So at IEEE, the Standards Association, we support about 600 active working groups. So at any given time, there are lots and lots of groups getting together around the world, as has been the model. And some of these groups, it's a full-time job for them. They crank out standards one after another. Other groups, they meet every 5 years when a document needs revision. So there's a very disparate level of expertise among our standards developers. So within the last couple of years, and let me back up and just say, another point I want to make is that I don't want to give the impression that we created a training and development program in response to the COVID pandemic. However, as Simon said, for some of these other things, what the pandemic sort of demonstrated was that there is going to be an ongoing need for a lot of the things that we're doing, and that COVID acted as an accelerant to some of the development of these materials. So I just want to give an overview of the context of SA training of our volunteers prior to the pandemic and the challenges that we wanted to address when we put a training and development program together. So the first, as I said, we're a very global organization, and there is heavy traveling in our organization, and travel is time and travel is money. Another issue that we wanted to address was that working group support, we have a whole slew of liaisons, staff liaisons who are wonderful in going out and building relationships with our working groups and training them. However, we found that there were a lot of individual variations in the content being presented to some of the working groups. And then with all of these working groups, as they increase and increase and increase, there is increased workload, and adding to headcount is difficult. Before a pandemic, I think next year it would be even more difficult. Finally, at IEEE, one of our largest growing constituencies is in Asia, particularly in China, and that has presented its own unique challenges. Great opportunities, but there are some challenges. A lot of the standards developers that we're working with there are inexperienced in IEEE processes and methodologies. There are some language barriers. Again, that travel is a big ticket item. And then there are differences in cultural norms. Things that we take for, not as canon, but we take for granted, like an understanding of a risk environment within the US, or issues of dominance or IP rights. These are concepts that maybe have a different, they're understood differently in China. So there's a need to convey those principles. And then finally, even though we do a lot of training, has been described as training, there is no tracking of the efficacy of these things. So the way it is that a liaison will go out, they'll give a presentation on our copyright policy, and then there's no tracking of was that presentation effective or not. So again, although COVID-19 was not the impetus or the catalyst for this program, it certainly is meshing very well with the needs that have become apparent because of COVID. Next, please, I think. So what have been the impacts of COVID? If you've been alive for the last eight months, you know what those impacts are. The biggest one, I think, has been for shutdowns, the initial and sporadic. So here, I'm in New Jersey in the United States, so the shutdowns came very, very quickly. We were all at work going, I wonder what's going to happen, and 3 days later we were told, go home and don't come back until we tell you to come back. So there was that initial shutdown, and what we're seeing now, unfortunately, is that there are going to be intermittent and sporadic shutdowns. So there is an immediate need to adapt to these virtual environments, and there's an ongoing need to toggle between the two. If you can see behind me, I'm in my office today. Later on today, I'll be at home. I'm sure all of you are sort of vacillating between those two environments as well. I think there's, for our organization, obviously long-term and probably permanent telecommuting. Then there's erratic schedules. People are, the 9 to 5 has slowly been getting eaten away by the edges just because of the demands put on people. parents out there, you guys are heroes. You're trying to teach your children, and you're trying to be a standards developer or a standards employee. You know, it's a lot, and all those roles cannot fit within a constrained amount of hours. I just don't think that that's realistic. There was, of course, immediate cessation of travel. And then even as travel has picked up, our organization has not asked or wanted IEEE staff to travel. And I think even when travel does come back, I think it's realistic to expect that there are staff who are going to be uncomfortable with doing so, or just they might just be unable to do so because of those roles, those demands on each of those individuals. So next, please. So, you know, I titled this The Post-Pandemic World. I don't know if there'll be a post-pandemic world. And if there is a post-pandemic world, will it be the same as the pre-pandemic world? Probably not. So thankfully, there's great news about vaccines. I think 2 are in the pipeline, although they may take, you know, I think Dr. Fauci said it's not until the fall of 2021 that we're really going to start seeing a huge impact or a significant impact from vaccines. But the reality is that in what the epidemiologists say, I quoted the CDC there, is that we have to anticipate and expect that these sort of pandemic-like situations will flare up periodically. And it doesn't seem now that globally we've found a very good way of controlling them, that we can just assume we can go back to normal. I think we always have to be prepared to adapt very, very quickly to a virtual environment. Next, please. So how does IEEE training and development work fit into all of this? So amid all of these challenges, the ones that were pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, what hasn't changed is a need to train our volunteers. You know, they're the ones creating the documents. They need to get their work done. So what we decided to do, again, about a year or so ago, was to create a concerted training and development activity on staff within the Standards Association. So we hired someone with training in education and instructional design, and we decided we were going to launch an e-learning program. So what this does, what I didn't know, I'm a publishing person who is now a training and development person, is I did not anticipate that there was so much methodology in making very good training materials. You know, I think in our organization, we used to think training was creating some PowerPoints and going out and addressing an audience, but it's much, much more rich than that. So there's a methodology that we can assess needs, we can work with working groups, we can work with staff to identify the gaps, identify what people actually need training on. E-learning, it also allows us to have consistent messaging. One of my team members, he said this once, it's an opportunity to be prescriptive rather than descriptive, and that was like a light bulb moment for me. It allows us to have consistent quality, consistent branding, and just it provides cohesion to all of these sort of training activities. Next, please. So we started an e-learning initiative. Again, I did not know much about these sort of principles, but some of the benefits of e-learning, it's ubiquitous. So that means material is always available. It could be available on the phone, on your laptop. You know, I said on the drop-off line, in the airport, anywhere where people are with these erratic and changing schedules, they will have access to the training. E-learning is also multimodal. There are so many different types of learners out there, and you know, a talking head may not be the best way of transmitting information. So e-learning is individualized and self-directed, it's interactive, and it provides feedback. So we have, there are activities within our modules and within any sort of e-learning, and that that reinforces and tests that people are actually learning the principles that you want them to learn. Next, please. So our first course went live in June 2020. It's called Working Group Chair Fundamentals. And to give you an idea, this took about a year of development time. This was a pretty big undertaking for our organization. There are 12 modules, and they range in everything from our organizational values to how to form a balloting group, how to write your draft, all those sorts of things. About 4.5 hours of material. If you're interested in the software, it was created in Articulate and housed on IEEE's learning management system, which is called Meridian. IEEE has its IEEE Learning Network, so this is housed on there. You have to register. You can get a little certificate after you finish the course, and quite a few people already have done that. And you can also earn professional development hours. And finally, because of a large part of the reason for doing this was our audience in China, we are translating it into Mandarin currently. Next, please. So what we learned. So I think, as I said earlier, COVID and its ongoing impacts are going to affect volunteer training going forward. Done right, e-learning and virtual training can be at least as effective and engaging as in-person training. All types of training will be increasingly virtual, whether that's because of financial reasons or because of pandemics. I think we all have to learn how to leverage this tool. It's on demand, and on-demand learning is going to be critical. And a virtual environment, as we're all learning, it's the one thing that we can't depend on the office being open, but we can hopefully depend on an internet connection. And finally, the biggest takeaway that I had was that the challenges are almost always harder with people than they are with technology. And I think SDOs, they have to expand their comfort level. Just as we have to expand our comfort level with meetings like this, I think we have to expand our comfort level with changing the model from this very in-person, one-on-one sort of training to a more virtual environment.
You hand over to Victoria and Patrice now. That would be great.
Hello, my name is Victoria Pirlo, and I head up the IT projects and support team for ISO Central Secretariat in Geneva. And I'm pleased to be here today with my colleague Patrice Canon, who manages the project that we'll be talking about a little bit later in this presentation. So driving innovation for standards is a journey where destination keeps changing with time and market needs. ISO has been and is committed to deliver global solutions that keep up with these market needs and, of course, be prepared for global challenges, such as the one that we're living today. But by market needs, we don't only mean standards that we deliver. It's also about delivering the infrastructure that the ISO community needs to efficiently contribute to the development of standards. Work to develop new and improved tools, platforms, and methodologies that enable the standards community to create standards is an ongoing endeavor. However, the pandemic has changed the way that we work and interact with one another. ISO has moved quickly and decisively by setting a variety of measures that safeguard the health and well-being of the ISO community. For example, since the pandemic started, and echoing Simon's presentation, we have held over 3,500 virtual technical meetings, as opposed to only 700 virtual technical meetings last year for the same period. This just goes to show just how fast things can change. In the standards world, the need for more online solution has just amplified overnight. And the voices are loud and clear. ISO will continue evolving its tools and solutions, but one project stands out in particular as a means to ensure that standards developers can effectively continue to work collaboratively to shape the world of tomorrow. For this new world, our online standards development project has the potential to revolutionize the environment for standards developers. In partnership with IEC, we are developing an online solution where the technical community can work efficiently and collaboratively to create standards, from a working draft through to a published standard. To achieve efficiency, standards developers will be accessing one single platform to work on standards rather than going through the different tools they use today. The solution will also be online, bringing collaboration to completely new levels. This solution will be a stepping stone that supports the speedy and quality creation of new products and services, which standards consumers are expecting from ISO and its members. But how do we make this vision a reality? Well, our vision for the project is built on 3 sound foundations or guiding principles. Standards development should be about enabling authors to work on what matters most, the content. Authors need not worry about the structure, the layout, or the presentation, which is usually covered in the standards directives. The solution should take care of these elements while the experts are focusing on the quality of the information we are providing the world, delivering high-quality standards to end users, and thereby ensuring ISO standards are used everywhere. Collaboration is a key element in standards development. By creating an online space for developing standards, technical experts and national members can leverage the benefits of stronger collaboration. Enhancing collaboration will support better transparency, faster resolutions, and higher efficiency overall. Ensuring standards are delivered when the market needs them, and thereby meeting those global needs. Finally, content quality must underpin the tool, bringing to life our directives and best practices in one consolidated environment, where normative references, definitions, elements, etc., become traceable through time, are interconnected, reinforcing not only their value, but also their recognition as the norm. So we are therefore building a platform which is made up of 3 building blocks. The first building block is authoring, which is about working group contributors creating the content on the working draft, drafting, reviewing, commenting among experts. The second building block is commenting, member commenting on a document during the key stages of standard development and resolution of those comments by the committees. And finally, the third building block is editing. This is about review and revision of a document by the standards organization before publication. At ISO or IEC, it's ensuring ISO IEC Directives Part 2 and any other applicable rules are respected. Of course, this is the final transformation of a document to a standard. Together, these 3 building blocks form one platform that covers the full standards development chain, from a working draft through to a published standard. Project leaders, technical experts in their working groups can start working on their standards in this solution. The same solution will enable national bodies to comment and validate the standard, all the way through to internal editors who will be working to transform the document into a published standard. So from start to finish, it's all happening in one place. Now, without further ado, here is a glimpse into the tool itself and what we have developed so far.
Today, authors use a variety of word processing tools to develop standards. When we worked on this new platform, we were careful to keep all the key functionality used by authors. In addition to the familiar features authors know so well, we have incorporated ISO STS XML encoding right from the start. So, as the content is created, so is the XML. This XML schema allows to define rules to use or reuse elements and manage their behavior. Another example is the implementation of automatic numbering according to the ISO IEC directives. The clause is automatically renumbered, as well as all relevant references. We are also excited to announce that the online collaborative authoring editor is based on a harmonized NISO STS configuration between IEC and ISO. This harmonization paves the way for future regional and national specificities. Today, content quality relies too heavily on authors and editors. With structure content, we can make the content more intelligent, following rules and directives, bringing our ISO IEC directives and guidelines to life inside the editor. We automate whatever makes more sense to automate. Here the normative references clause is automatically populated with references created in the document. Finally, standards authoring is also about collaborating with others in the working group. Contributors can respond to each other's comments and create a discussion until consensus is reached. Leaders of the working group can also resolve comments. Comments can be placed on any part of the document. Finally, to ease the work of the working group, comments can be filtered by type or resolution. All comments and their resolution are saved and can be exported for future reference. Once ready, the document can be viewed in HTML or exported to Word. For more information on the tool and the project, visit our dedicated webpage.
With that, I think you'll understand just how excited we are, and especially given the current context, that our first pilot group went live on October 12, 2020. That's right, they're already starting to make standards using this new platform. Working group contributors, such as project leaders and conveners, are collaboratively working on standards as we speak. As they author and comment on their working drafts, we are constantly receiving their feedback, which we will use to further improve the solution. So it's really a living, breathing entity. New working groups will be added to the pilot on an ongoing basis to start developing standards in this solution. And to avoid any delays in the use of the tool by the ISO community, we've divided the implementation in 3 steps, which reflect the tool's 3 building blocks, which are standards authoring, members commenting, and internal editing. So focusing on the authoring aspects of the tool first, which are already in production with our pilot groups, and then adding the member commenting features in Q2 2021, and finally including the internal editing features in Q3 2022. So we're not slowing down the pace at any stage. We're delivering and improving the platform in a production environment. So I hope you'll look out for more in 2021. And thank you very much for your attention.
That's great. Thank you very much, Victoria and Patrice for supporting that, and that's quite inspirational stuff there coming from ISO. So we've got a little bit of time now before the end of our session for questions, and we've had 3 questions come through so far on the Q&A, which I've just posted across so you can see them. The first from Tom is really around what I referred to in the mixed sessions around what we were calling blended meetings. So where you've got people in a room and also virtual attendees, and those tend to be the worst experiences that we get reported on. So Tom's question is really, how do we keep the gains from this year and improve that experience as people head back to face-to-face meetings as things improve after the pandemic? Now, we've definitely identified that as one of the main crunch points, certainly at BSI, and I think that's the focus of from our standards making community and the people who are progressing this. That's one of the core challenges, and I think it's a combination of the facilities from a physical standpoint in the rooms that we use for our physical meetings, combined with the use of better tools beyond just the meeting room tools. So we're all familiar, way too familiar now with Zoom and Teams and WebEx and similar, that we all have to jump between. And these are not necessarily fully functional in terms of all the tool sets that we need to carry out the different activities that are involved in the committees. And so it's about extending that tool set to be optimal, and also improving just the basics around, for me, audio and visual sharing that we have. So it's very much front of mind, I think, for the people who are looking ahead. But I think it will be similar to Victoria's last slide there. I think it will be a progression over time as we move to a better scenario. Secondly, I might need a little bit of input from some of my colleagues who were on the meeting around standards development and whether standards development policies and procedures were changed or amended formally for these rapid standards. I certainly know from BSI's point of view and my perspective in terms of the couple that I spoke about with NEN and with AFNOR, my belief is that these aren't formal standards, and they're very clearly marked as not formal standards, so that we could work in an accelerated fashion. I think if these documents then take shape, then they would move into the formal standards world and follow those policies and procedures downstream if that were required. And I certainly know that the BSI document has now been passed forward to be considered as a PAS with ISO that's sort of going to be published imminently, I believe. So in answer to that one, Robert, I think at this stage, no. I think if rapid standards development becomes the norm, then obviously that would need to be the case, and that would change. I'll pass on to Victoria, I think, for this last question around publishing of standards in formats that can be used by requirements management tools. Don't know if you can see that question, Victoria.
Yes, I think I can, and I think the answer to that is that we are starting a SMART project to look at such things, and better management and discovery of contents is something we'll definitely be looking at. Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm just going to skip back and see if we have any new questions coming in that I can publish up. Here we go. I'm just putting those through. So are those tools available for the community to see, Victoria? And well, you've got a number of questions coming through. Let me just see if we can manage a few of them.
I did see the one that said, you know, whether the tool was available just yet. So we are working with pilot groups as we speak. But this is obviously a very rapidly evolving situation. So yes, do look out for more soon.
Okay, we also have a question around whether you developed them on your own or was it built on top of an existing product? And what platform were you using to manage the ISO STS?
I think maybe I'll let Patrice answer that question if you would like to. You'll have all the detail.
With pleasure. Hi, nice to meet you. My name is Patrice, and I'm the program manager for this program at ISO. I'm very happy to see you today. So yeah, we are building a configuration on a tool called Fonto XML that we basically use to support the different schemas we will be using right now and in the future. Yeah. Is there any more questions?
Yeah, there's one around. So the platform you use to store the content that's managed by an ISO STS, is that Fonto as well?
So Fonto is the UI and it manages the configuration. For the storage, we use MarkLogic. That allows us to basically store the XML, and MarkLogic is a very efficient and well-performing platform to exploit the XML. So yeah, we use MarkLogic. We use a backend which is developed in Kotlin, and we use Fonto XML for the UI.
Okay. There's a question around whether we'll be able to view those recordings or the demos. Those will be published as part of the conference, so everybody will be able to revisit this information. So that's useful. Robert's asking, is balloting part of the ISO IEC tool, Victoria?
We will definitely, the tool is definitely going to address member commenting and comment resolution. So yes, we will be looking into those aspects by Q2 2021.
Excellent. And then finally, there's a question about participation. So obviously this is a very interesting project, and I'm sure that there'll be SDOs that will be very interested in finding out more, getting involved and participating in the platform. So I wonder what the ISO position and where you're up to with that at this point. So that's the final question, Victoria, there.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just didn't catch the end of it, Simon. If you could just repeat the question.
Whether other SDOs would be able to participate and share and share in the development and use of the platform in the future.
Yes. The short answer to that is yes.
Great. Okay. I'd assume that would be the idea in terms of us all working together on.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Yes. Anything that can be leveraged, of course. Yes.